Please be seated.
Thank you. Your Honour, this is panel 9.2 on child safety, complaint handling and risk management.
You all need to be sworn. Would you take an oath on the Bible?
Yes.
Anyone not? Would you all stand for me? There'll be Bibles distributed if you can make sure you've got your hand on a Bible. And together repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
The evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
The evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat.
Can I start with you, Mr Eustace? Could you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Mark Richard
Your
Eustace.
voice is not coming through.
Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name
Mark Richard Eustace.
and your occupation, Mr Eustace?
I'm the Director of Professional Standards for the Catholic Church in Queensland.
Is that for the Archdiocese of Brisbane or broader than that?
No, it's a state level office, not the Archdiocese.
So that's in relation to all the dioceses in Queensland.
Correct.
How many dioceses are there in Queensland?
5.
Now, your professional history since you took up this position? Before you took up this position?
I was a member of the Queensland Police Service for 27 years.
What sort of policing did you do?
A little bit of a journeyman, I suppose. I did a range of different roles across the police service, including general duties, working in Indigenous communities, criminal investigations. I was a senior policy officer, a project officer, and a few other things in between.
What qualifications do you have?
I have a Master of International Relations and a Bachelor of Education.
Is this the first position you've had since leaving the police?
No, it's not.
What other work did you do?
I did a short role with a mining company as the Superintendent of Community Relations.
Now, you began this role in January 2014.
6th of January 2014.
Are you the first person that's held that position of director?
No.
There was one prior to you?
There's been a number of directors prior to me. I think I'm the first full-time director.
The previous ones were part-time.
I believe so.
When did the Professional Standards Office begin in Queensland?
I understand it began in 1997, probably with the implementation of towards healing. But I do believe there was people in the role before that. It may have been a different role.
You're the first full-time
That's my
director.
understanding, but I'm not too sure whether others were full-time.
Who do you report to, Mr Eustace?
I have a reporting arrangement with a liaison committee. The liaison committee has 2 bishops and 2 senior religious nuns, and they represent the Catholic Religious Queensland chapter and also the Bishops Queensland.
And their role is to direct your work?
It's more of a governance arrangement. They don't necessarily direct my work, but they will overview the administration and running of my office.
Who determines the strategy of what you do?
I do.
And do you need approval for that strategy?
It's a bit loose, to be honest with you, but there are some things I will put to the liaison committee and other things that I don't.
Give us an example of what you wouldn't put.
Oh, well, there's employment, a number of resources in the office, budgeting, all that. That mainly goes through the liaison committee. But I've made a point of putting initiatives, if you like, to the liaison committee at times for noting.
What do they have to approve?
It's more about obtaining their support for some of these things, and sharing information at that level as well. Because I'm aware that they may well then take that back to the Queensland Conference of Bishops or CRA Queensland.
But what is it that they have to approve?
Well, they approve the budget every year, and any other positions in the office, employment, etc.
Policies and procedures, do they go to the liaison committee?
No, not generally.
You determine those, do you?
Yes.
Including in the area of child protection?
Well, we don't have a direct role in child protection at the diocesan or religious institution level. We don't have that direct influence over those particular activities.
But to the extent that your policies and procedures touch on those matters, do they go to the liaison committee for approval?
No, not generally. They wouldn't go to them for approval, but I often will put them in front of the liaison committee for noting and maybe some recommendations.
Now, you say that the Professional Standards Office, which you head, doesn't have a direct role in discharging child protection safeguarding functions. Who has that direct role?
That is the responsibility of the various religious orders in Queensland or the dioceses themselves. Under Towards Healing, there is a section that deals in prevention. But again, if you read that, it places the responsibility and the onus upon the religious order or the church authority generally.
So what is it that you do?
Well, we try to, as best as I can, I try to bring matters to attention and I try to influence and recommend as much as I can. And we do that through various means. We certainly have been trying to do that in the last 3 years.
That doesn't help me very much, I have to say, Mr. Eustons. You try and bring matters to attention and influence and recommend. What matters?
If there's new initiatives in the area, we will try and put that to the liaison committee.
But in what area?
In child protection, safeguarding, complaints management. If we pick up on that, we will share that information. We have a professional standards network that we use to share that information as well as the liaison committee.
I'm still not quite clear on what it is you do. Do you investigate complaints?
We investigate complaints. That would be our primary role.
So complaints come to you directly or via another source within the church?
Correct.
And under Towards Healing, you provide that investigative work?
That's right.
And so that's primarily your job, is
That's
to
our primary role at the moment.
And do you have any roles in other aspects of the Towards Healing process or just investigating?
Which other aspects?
Well, there's aspects of making decisions about disciplinary action. There's aspects about reporting to police. There's supporting survivors. There's meeting with survivors.
Insofar as the Towards Healing process allows us to do that, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, there's certain things that I have discretion and my office has discretion over within Towards Healing process. The Towards Healing process is the tool or the mechanism given to my office to manage complaints and try and resolve those complaints. And there are certain things in it that we have discretion over. For instance, it might be whether a matter has to be assessed or investigated, for instance.
That would be your decision.
Towards Healing provides that if there's a dispute or a significant dispute about certain allegations or claims, well, then the matter has to be investigated, or the director shall have the matter investigated.
So you determine whether there's a significant dispute?
No, the church authority will give us a response. They put the allegations to the accused person. If there's a significant dispute, we will have the matter investigated.
From what you've said, it sounds like your job is confined to complaint investigating at the behest of someone else. Is that right?
Primarily, yes.
And after you've investigated the complaint, you tell somebody else in the church as to your findings. Is that right?
Correct.
And then they do whatever they do with those findings.
The church authority is responsible for the outcomes.
Well, for making the decision about what to do.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now, looking at the material you provided, you refer to advising the church authority to undertake a risk assessment and any action deemed necessary to protect vulnerable others. So that's a role you have?
That's something that we've added to the process, if you like.
And it's an advisory role only?
That's right.
You don't carry out the risk assessment?
No, we don't. We deal with, we could be dealing with church authorities anywhere across Australia.
Across Australia?
Yes.
Why would you be dealing with them outside Queensland?
We will deal with the complaints where the survivor resides in Queensland.
regardless of where.
regardless of where the incident took place.
And you have individual dealings, I take it, with each diocese within Queensland,
Yes,
with each parish?
not with each parish.
So there's somebody who you speak to at each diocese when something comes up of an investigative nature?
Yes, there is.
Now, you'll know that some other states have what's variously described as safeguarding programs or positions. Is there anything like that in Queensland?
Each of the dioceses has got something in place now, to varying degrees, I guess. The Archdiocese of Brisbane would be leading the way at the moment, I think.
The Archdiocese of Brisbane leading the way in what
terms of their
respect?
safeguarding response. They have dedicated safeguarding officers. They have a full child protection safeguarding policy in play. It's been in play for almost 2 years, I believe, and they've recently audited as well.
Do you work with those people at all?
I was on the committee for the establishment of their safeguarding policy.
And you say that they're leading the way. Has any comparison been done with the other states?
Not by me.
So,
Leading the way in Queensland, I mean.
I see. Thank you.
But then they have the means and the resources to enable it too, I guess.
Now, you refer to a national complaints database for churches authorities.
Yes.
Is that established within Queensland or, as it suggests, nationally?
No, it's a national database.
Who's responsible for putting information into that database?
Each state office is responsible for putting information in.
State Office of Professional Standards.
Yeah, and the National Office for Professional Standards.
And you check that in relation to every complaint that you have to investigate.
We do.
And
we'll enter information of new complaints as well.
I see. So you enter information about your complaints.
Correct.
Is it the fact of a complaint or the outcome of a complaint that determines whether you put anything into the database?
No, the fact of a complaint is a position I take.
Thank you. Now, you offer training workshops
Yes.
to whom?
Church personnel generally, we will offer them across the diocese. We have run training sessions in the seminaries each year I've been there. We've offered training to religious, clergy, church personnel generally who are interested.
Do you offer it on a commercial basis, that is a fee for service, or not?
No, we don't.
Now, you refer to having established a Queensland Professional Standards Network. Who's in that network?
The network is comprised of myself and my staff, and those representatives from each diocese who are involved in professional standards or safeguarding, and a representative from Catholic Religious Queensland chapter.
So there are dioceses that have their own professional standards officers, is that right?
Correct.
And do they report to you or to the bishop of the diocese?
They report to the bishop.
So in terms of you having a statewide role, how does that work?
Well, again, we go back to Towards Healing document. In respect to complaints of abuse against church personnel, strictly the church authorities, if they receive information or complaints, should refer the matter to my office in the first instance and allow my office to respond.
Should.
Correct.
Do they?
Look, it varies.
Well, we'll come back to Towards Healing a little bit later. Now, you say also that you've implemented trauma-informed practices and safeguards. What have you done in that regard?
We consulted with the Blue Knot Foundation, and we've had training for ourselves and others that are involved in professional standards of safeguarding. And we've all run that practice, and we've tried to weave into our practices those things that would better protect, in my view, the interests of survivors who are going through the Towards Healing process, and also, allow them to get the appropriate support whilst going through the process.
Now, you've got a process and a policy in relation to reporting to police.
Yes.
What's that?
Well, again, going back to Towards Healing, it provides that if a complaint is received or information is received that indicates that abuse by church personnel has occurred, and it might be criminal in nature, the matter needs to be reported to the police, and it's the director's role to do that, or the Professional Standards Office role to do that. We will do that on behalf of church authorities. We take a broader view of that responsibility. If we have concerning information at that level, we often will refer information across. We've tried to build on that a little bit by providing options to survivors to allow us to share their information with the police, but acknowledging that they may not want to be contacted about it. And I've been surprised at the uptake of that. And again, I think that empowers people to make a decision. I believe that fits with the Queensland Police Service's policy and protocol on the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences as well, in that they won't pursue a matter necessarily if they don't have a willing complainant. My sense is that people will elect to allow us to share their personal information with the police because they may be of use, or that information might be of use to the police.
In cases where the person does not want you to provide their information to the police, do you do so anyway under blind reporting?
We provide information on their disclosure or their allegations or their complaint and the person who's been accused, but we will not provide the survivor's name if they don't want us to.
And the police are happy with that approach?
Yes, they are.
Now, you've been in that position 3 years now?
3 years.
Can you tell the commissioners what you think your most significant achievement has been in the area of protecting children or improving the response of church authorities to abuse?
I like to think that we've established a greater degree of independence of the Professional Standards Office, and I think that's important. In my view, under Towards Healing, the Professional Standards Office is meant to be independent from church authorities, particularly in the management of very serious child sexual abuse complaints, albeit historic. I think in doing that we've lifted transparency and we've lifted accountability through the process. That's not always been popular with some church authorities, but I think we have lifted the accountability. We've tried to therefore build consistency in our response and what people can expect. And I think we've tried to empower survivors entering the process. We're not in the game of, if you like, railroading people into the Towards Healing process. It is the tool that's given to my office to operate. And we've tried to be true to that. But from the get-go, we will advise survivors of all their options for redress. And I would like to think they make informed decision to enter the process or informed decision to take another course of action. And we are very transparent throughout the process. We like to give them sufficient information to make informed decisions all the way through the process, and engage them on how that goes about. Having said that, there are some parts that we just need to undertake, for instance, like an investigation, and I acknowledge that can be very confronting for people, and that's I'm a little bit uneasy with that, but I think it's how you go about it.
Thank you. You said that you've established a greater degree of independence. What have you actually done to establish that greater degree of independence?
When I started in 2014, I met immediately with the Queensland Bishops' Conference, and shortly thereafter with Catholic Religious Australia Queensland chapter, and I put to them an operating model, and I made it very clear that our office would be running independently, and we would run the process impartially.
I just still don't quite understand what you mean by independently. What is it that you actually do that you say renders you independent?
Insofar as the Towards Healing process is delivered or managed, we will run that in a very independent way and in a very impartial way.
What do you do to make it independent?
Well, we adhere to the policy as much as we possibly can. Very rarely would I, particularly with very serious child sexual abuse allegations, would I use any discretion to skip the process without consultation with all parties involved in it. So we like to bring that level of rigour to it. And I think if you put aside policy as it's written and intended to be implemented, it raises grounds for potential reviews, and that's not useful to many people. And it brings a level of accountability through the process. So we do it that way.
Sorry, accountability to whom?
Accountability to church authorities, accountability for our office as well in that process. So we're very upfront about that.
Does your office publish statistics on complaints received, investigations, outcomes and the like?
No, it doesn't, but I understand the national office may well do that.
Do you feed into the national office?
We do.
You do?
The data is usually taken out of the database.
Have you considered publishing statistics of that type in Queensland?
What I've done recently, because it was, I think as of November or December last year, towards Healing had its 20th birthday, if you like, I decided to do a full sweep and analysis of the data held in my office only. And we analysed that, and it's not empirical evidence or data, I hasten to add, but we derived from that a whole range of different indicators and information that we have been, over the last year, revealing to people in our training sessions, in our stakeholder engagement sessions, our awareness training sessions, and it reflects pretty much what the Royal Commission has revealed in its data as well.
So have you published that data in a public forum?
We haven't formally publicised it or published it, no.
When you talk about stakeholders, do you mean inside or outside the church?
Oh, inside and outside. Some of our service providers, I'm happy to talk to them about that. I think we need to be transparent about the data in my office and what it reveals over time.
What are the challenges you still face, Mr. Eustons?
I think there is a continuing culture of discretion, as it's been put to me in the past. And I think that will be the ultimate challenge to change that culture. I like to think we've shifted that in pockets around Queensland. I think within that is that perhaps a lack of willingness in different areas to be, to fully disclose things and to take formal action when they need to.
What areas are you talking about?
Well, it could be just at the parish level. It could be anywhere. There's still a reticence to make a telephone call or to blow the whistle if concerning information is arising. And I think that's changing now. I think it will continue to change.
What have you done to assist that change?
We've marketed ourselves very widely. We will take all the phone calls. We will assist church authorities wherever we can. We have multiple avenues to get in contact with us now. We have a national free 1-800 free call number, general email address, website, etc., etc. And we are more than happy to take phone calls and assist church authorities. And we have put a lot of effort in the last 2 years to talking to all our stakeholders about what we do and what we can assist with and where we can value add.
So there's still a reticence, notwithstanding that?
Well, the recent issues have arisen where I've wondered why a person just didn't make a phone call.
Why didn't they? Have you found out?
Just thought it's something they should be discretionate about.
I'm sorry?
It's just an issue they thought they should be discretionate about.
Right. Thank you. Ms Parola, would you tell the Royal Commission your full name? I think that's going to be a bit hard to hear you.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
My name is Claire Parola.
Thank you. And Ms Parola, what's your position?
I manage the Office for Safeguarding and Professional Standards in the Catholic Diocese of Parramatta.
How long
in New
have you
South
been in that
Wales.
position?
14 months.
14 months?
14 months.
Thank you. And what did you do before that?
Initially, I commenced working as a welfare worker for several years with women and children, and a few of those years was with Family and Community Services as a district officer. I commenced studying law there, and I moved to the employment of the New South Wales Police Association in the 1990s in their legal division, and I worked there for 10 years. I was admitted as a legal practitioner in 1999, I think it was. And then I moved to the employment of the Catholic Commission for Employment Relations in the area of advising Catholic employers in New South Wales in child protection, in particular on the implementation of the Part 3A of the New South Wales Ombudsman's Act and the employment screening that had come out of the Woods Royal Commission. I was there for about four to 5 years, and then I moved into private practice for several years. And then I moved into the employment of the Catholic Education Office of Sydney Archdiocese in their child protection team. And then I moved over to this position in the Diocese of Parramatta.
Are you the first person to have held this position?
No, they had two managers prior to me.
When did the office begin, do you know?
July 2014.
Now, what is your role as managing the office?
My role is to oversee many of the operations of the office to deliver to the Bishop the 7 core functions in safeguarding and compliance or around professional standards.
Do you have a role to play in complaint handling?
Yes.
Are you the primary complaint handling body for complaints against clergy and lay people and others?
In the Diocese of Parramatta?
Yes.
Yes, so the process in the Diocese of Parramatta is that any allegations in relation to abuse or high-risk behaviour towards children should come to our office through our agencies and our ministries.
Do you follow Towards Healing?
When the Office of Safeguarding was set up following a review of professional standards and the diocesan response to survivors of abuse, of child abuse, the office, one of the outcomes of that review through the office was to set up a process that is underpinned by the principles of Towards Healing, but it has some alternative approaches to it. The
parish priest plays a role in safeguarding and professional standards in your diocese. Is that right?
In what context? Sorry, just so I understand the question.
Does the parish priest play any role in the work that you do in safeguarding and professional standards?
They must report any allegations of abuse to us. That would be their primary role.
And other than reporting to you, they don't have responsibility for responding in any way to those allegations?
When an allegation is received, there's a response to the complainant or the victim. They may not be the same person. In that response to the person who's brought forward the information or the victim, in the risk management of that, a parish priest may be involved in some way. For example, in a pastoral response to the person if, say, they've come through the parish and that's appropriate for the individual who's come forward. They certainly would not be involved in the allegation related to any part of their conduct or anything that had occurred within the parish.
Thank you. You say in your information you provided to the Royal Commission that your office operates independently and reports directly to the Bishop. Now, firstly, who are you independent from?
We're in... when the office was set up, it became, in the context of the office, it became more independent than what was believed to be previously existing in terms of responding to people who'd been abused.
But independent of whom?
Of a number of persons within the diocese in positions who may be able to influence best outcomes for survivors or influence the process.
How was that achieved?
Yeah, so we're not there yet. So one of our mantras is we haven't got this right yet, and we really want to try and keep working to get it right. What's been trialled, where the significant shift came, was that the office, in the setup of the office, there's a few significant factors which is different to what existed before. One is the director of the office is actually an external lawyer, so who looks at strategy and governance and reports directly to the bishop.
So you're the manager?
I'm the manager. We have a director above the
you.
office. That's correct. So myself and the team, we report to the director of our office. So we don't report to anyone else senior in the chancery of the bishop's office. So that would be different to if I was. That would have been different to previously.
So
That's
previously, your position reported directly to the bishop?
Previously, this position didn't exist. So so prior to the establishment of our office, professional standards was mainly, as I understand it, was mainly managed through through a external consultant to the bishop around how to manage it.
I'm just trying to understand what you've told us. You've said that the office was established in July 2014
That's correct.
to ensure accountability and support of all diocesan agencies. This office operates independently and reports directly to the bishop.
It doesn't come over. It doesn't sound. That sounds inconsistent. I appreciate that. So, just in that context, okay. So, in terms of, I guess, part of the independency that exists now with the staff is that we report to the director, who is an independent person, so not an employee. Okay, that's one thing. The other significant part is the response arm to victims who come forward. Is managed by, we have what we call a healing and support service. And the healing and support service has people independent from our office. So there's a couple of employees from another agency who are skilled and qualified to companion people who have come forward from trauma, and a panel of external providers as well, such as psychologists experienced in this area. So that was part of, and they operate independent of our office but through our service. So
independent of your office, but employed by the diocese in some
the
form or another.
payments, absolutely. And if I may say, one of the very important dialogues that we welcome is the whole concept of independency. Working with people who've been through trauma with church or anywhere, they never would. Any time a bill's paid by the church, they will often question if it's independent in any way.
Is the director a consultant engaged by the diocese? Is that right?
That's correct.
A full-time position?
No,
So you report to that person who reports to the bishop?
correct. Now, as well, in terms of responses to victims, we have the independent panel called Reparations Advisory Panel. So if the person wishes to come forward with anything that they're seeking, some sort of reparation, some sort of response, it goes to that panel. And that's made up of a psychologist, a civil lawyer, and the mother of a survivor of abuse who's since deceased. And there's, of course, the Professional Standards Advisory Panel made up of independent people who advises the bishop. They're not part of our office, but that's been in existence since 2010, and would advise the bishop on professional standards issues around risk and strategy.
Now, you say that there's a requirement within the diocese, including clergy, that there be 7 hours of mandatory professional learning each year.
Correct.
And does that include the bishop?
Absolutely.
And there's some record keeping, presumably, of that
Yes.
attendance.
Yes.
Is that professional learning within or outside of the church?
Do you mean, is it delivered within, or do they attend?
Firstly, is it delivered within the church? That is, by the church itself?
It's delivered. Our office delivers the training, but it may not necessarily be us who are the presenters.
So you may engage people outside of the church to present to the people who are required to attend?
Yes, yes. The short answer is yes, particularly this year. So when the mandatory training, so it's 7 hours, and 7 hours is insufficient, but it's a start. So 7 hours of training for all leaders in the diocese.
How did you come up with 7 hours?
I think I'm not sure. I can ask where the 7 hours came from, but I think it's because it's the start. It was a one-day mandatory that all leaders in this diocese must come for a day's training on this as a starting point.
Thank you.
We've moved to modules this year, and in the modules we have people from outside coming and talking to those. So it's all the clergy, all leaders in schools, in Catholic care, etc.
Thank you. Now, you refer to an audit process having been initiated.
Yeah, so in our team, in our office, we have a training and compliance officer. And so part of that role is obviously training, and the other part is compliance, and there's audits as part of that.
So what's the audit process?
The audit looks at what systems are in place to provide a safe environment. So it'll look at how someone is. We'll be looking at how someone is selected or brought in. It'll be looking at that they're complying with the processes for identifying high-risk behaviour or reporting.
Have any audits been completed?
The audit on the Catholic schools has been completed.
Have the results been published?
No.
Is it proposed that these results be published?
I would like the results to be published. I would also like our data to be published, but that decision hasn't been made yet. We're still in conversations around that.
So you've put the proposition forward, but it hasn't yet been agreed to, is that right?
Yeah, it's been something we've been discussing for a while about making public the data around how we manage the systems and respond to allegations.
Why wouldn't you make it public?
I would like to.
Can you think of any reasons why it shouldn't be made public?
Why others may not want it public, do you mean?
Why it shouldn't be made public?
No, I cannot think of any reason why it should not be public. I think it should be public.
Now, you say that the diocese regularly engages with professional standards personnel from other dioceses and religious orders. That's within New South Wales?
Correct.
Is there any overarching body in New South Wales in relation to professional standards?
There's the New South Wales Professional Standards Office. It exists, but not in terms of the reference of that, what I put forward in that comment. So, and not one with, there's no authority-based overarching professional standards that would direct how professional standards occurs through the church.
So how do you work with the the New South Wales body?
Oh, well, we report the outcomes of our own process. We let them know, as that's part of towards healing. They need to know, and that's a central place for outcomes to be. We liaise with them around some systems, such as they introduced the ACMR.
What's that?
The new register for clergy going across dioceses nationally. So, we'd liaise with them because they introduced that. We had what we call a clergy ministry card system in the Greater Sydney across a few dioceses already in place. So working with them about looking at how that will move together. Training. They would have policies that we might look at some stage and looking at our own policies. My reference to collaboration council in relation to across dioceses is an informally established group of practitioners who hold various roles, but some simply these roles, from each of the Bishop's Office in New South Wales, who have started to meet about a year and a half ago, quarterly. And they're working together to try and look at consistency in approach and how it can improve. But there's no formality to that, unfortunately.
Do you access the database that Mr Euston spoke of?
No, I'm not aware that we do.
So you and your office don't put in data to the national database that he referred to?
So No, we put data, we provide the outcomes of our matters to the New South Wales Professional Standards Office. That's my understanding. When you said access it, I thought you meant do we obtain information from that?
Do you obtain information from it?
Not that I'm aware of.
So you give data to the the New South Wales body, and your expectation would be they would provide it to that database. Is that right? Or you don't know?
I don't know. I don't know how that works.
Now, you refer in your paper to various challenges. Now, one challenge is in relation to the risk of not identifying risks or gaps. How's that a challenge?
Sorry, which letter was that?
You say that there's a risk of not identifying risks or gaps without a complaint or an audit process.
So I just wanted to, Councillor, just get the context.
5,
Just to make sure I'm answering
item
you
4.1
properly.
and the first dot point.
Okay. The reason I include that point is because I think it's a very real and practical challenge that even if we have audits in place and robust, processes, that we can still miss early indicators of abuse. And I was just naming it because I think that's a true reality. It will still happen at times, and that's why we need to always be vigilant and so forth. But that's what that was referring to.
You refer also to allocating adequate resources to achieve cultural change that is proactive, committed to ongoing education and making child safety and prevention the first priority. How do you think that cultural change can be achieved?
In terms of resourcing, or are you just asking me generally?
Generally.
Generally. I think some of the aspects that may shift the cultural change would be a national consistent approach in relation to child protection. So responding to allegations, ensuring safe environments first, and responding to survivors.
Are you talking about within the church or more generally within institutions?
I'm talking more generally, certainly within the church, but no, more generally. People move in and out of agencies and children come across different agencies. So a consistent approach is I think, is a no-brainer, really, a national approach. I think data, accurate data that can be used to inform our responses and understands what's happening is absent and needs to happen. And when there's data given and it's given publicly and to relevant authorities, I think that can help bring around cultural shift. If I can give you an example on that. So in the last 16 years in New South Wales, many agencies have worked under the Part 3A provision of the New South Wales Ombudsman. And my observations or experience of that is that it's shifted culture in this state for those agencies quite profoundly. And there's a number of reasons for that, but part of it was because we could get data from them. So they can actually tell us how many allegations there may be. We can look at the types of findings that are being made from those. And that then informs us as to what are the issues emerging, and then we can decide how to best respond. So I do think data is critical. Without that, we can just go round and round in circles and talk a lot.
And Part 3A is a New South Wales provision, that's right?
It is.
And there's nothing in other states that you're aware of that permits you to exchange information about child protection matters in those states. Is that right?
To exchange information, but
Yes.
sorry, Part 3A is the requirement to report certain allegations of behaviour about employees to the New South Wales Ombudsman.
I understand that, but as you understand it, there's no requirement similar to that for the moment reportable conduct scheme in other states.
No, I'm not aware that there are. I understand there's discussion around it. Yeah.
And you can, via the Ombudsman's Act, exchange information with other agencies about child protection matters, can't you?
Yes, yes.
But you
Is the
can't do
short
that
answer.
external to New South Wales.
That's correct. We also have another mechanism in New South Wales. It's known as Chapter 16A under the Children and Young Person Care and Protection Act, which enables prescribed agencies to exchange information.
And
to
you're a
assist
prescribed agency?
School, yes. Yes. In the sense that we operate for schools, so we are schools are a prescribed agency, and so forth, and we have other services to children.
So are there other suggestions you would like to make for change that would improve the safety of children and the response of the churches to allegations?
Yes. I think the leadership is critical. So unless the right people are leading this wherever, again, we're going around in circles. I've heard a lot of discussion in the last few weeks around reporting to police, and I find it quite troubling that that's still a discussion happening. So we seriously need to look at the leadership of people in positions to influence change of culture and act. So if someone in a leadership position in church, I'm talking of, or really anywhere, is still questioning if they need to make a police report, they shouldn't. They need to move. They need to get out. They should not be in a position of leadership.
Is that happening in your diocese?
We're working at it. So, for example, through some of our training, certain people might challenge, if they challenge that concept, we then identify them as a person of concern in terms of leadership, and would take some steps to try and either have that corrected, or if they still held the position that they're not going to report or they don't need to report, and we were aware of that, the recommendation to the bishop is that they should be removed because that would present a risk to children.
Has that happened?
We're in a conversation at the moment in relation to that.
So has it happened?
Which part? Sorry, that we have enacted? Yes. So if
No. Has it happened that somebody has questioned whether or not they need to report, and you have then spoken to them? Has that happened?
yes,
More than once?
yes.
With what results?
With results, most results that they've accepted the position, and at the moment there's one that was still working. But it's too early to say if they're going to correct their position on that.
Is that a risk in your diocese, that there's not a robust approach to reporting to police?
From individuals, yeah, I think it's a risk everywhere.
But
If
is
there are
it-
still individuals existing anywhere who have that view, that's a concern. The diocesan, in terms of the leadership, if there was a leader who wasn't going to report to the police, they shouldn't be in that position of leadership.
Is there a culture of not reporting within your diocese?
I think there is I think one of our risks is that there is still a view by some that they have a discretion in it. I'm not sure if I'd say it's a whole culture, because we get so many coming to us with information for police reports or making them themselves. So the schools have been doing this for a long time, much better, much more regulated and oversighted. Some of the other ministries and services may not have been as accountable previously on this. So it's hard to know what's not happening if we don't know it's not happening. But we certainly have numerous police reports being made. and that may be peer-to-peer, it may be, through the schools, it may be a range of things, but we certainly, So it's happening. I don't know how much is not happening because I don't know. Does that make sense?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Is there anything further you wanted to suggest by way of change?
Just two things, briefly, if I may. One is that one of the big shifts in our practice, I think, in recent years, and it's certainly an emphasis of mine, is focusing on high-risk behaviour of adults working with children, or young people with young people even. One of the concerns I have is that there's a big emphasis on, when you know that there's sexual abuse, we make the report and we act. And that's important. However, the majority of matters that we deal with in this work and that we see are matters where there aren't convictions, where we get behaviour that, people don't wake up and just sexually abuse tomorrow. There's behaviours that have been indicated earlier, high-risk behaviour, and if we don't start responding with that in a consistent way and an early way, then we're not going to interrupt that behaviour. That's a challenge because that's unpalatable. Most people, most leaders would say these days, yes, of course we'll tell the police if someone said I'm being sexually abused. We know that. But when we have the conversation with them to say we're really concerned about that person's behaviour because they're piggybacking their kid around the parish grounds and, they gave them, they sent them a little text or something. When we have that sort of stuff, often I still see a resistance to saying, well, they haven't done anything criminal. So no, but this is where we intervene. If we're serious about protecting kids, we have to intervene right back when those early indicators come up. I think that's critical in the focus of now and the way forward in terms of safe systems. Does that make sense? And I'm afraid that's going to get... I do worry that may get lost in the big focus on the criminal element when we know it's a crime.
The conduct you've described could well be grooming.
Absolutely.
And most certainly is boundary violations in relation to the other conduct. Why would there be a reticence about reporting boundary violations and grooming behaviour?
I'm not sure why people are concerned about that. I think part of it may be a lack of understanding of what that behaviour could be. When I started working with church for the first time in 2000, having come from a history of outside, I found it quite a different culture around, and I think because there's faith parts to the organisation around how they view people. Generally people find it hard to understand or that someone who does a lot of good things and may have some goodness to them, right, also can do something really bad and a crime, be a criminal. So, families will struggle with that, where a parent may abuse and others will say, well, they were a good neighbour, they helped me with this, or they were good with others. So I think that's a basic thing.
Is that a culture that's happening today, as you've observed it?
I think it's still there. I think people still struggle to see, they're looking for like a black and white, like an offender's going to look like this. No, they don't. And our responsibility when we're working in this area is to intervene early when you see any high-risk behaviour. When we're training people, I say, look, we put up examples of known offenders' grooming behaviour early on. And often we say, look at this behaviour. And often people say, oh, I do. Well, they went to have a meal with the family. Well, that's a pastoral response. They, that child needed extra help. They gave them extra help. It may be a pastoral response. What I say to them is that we don't know until the sexual act has occurred if that behaviour is okay or not, unless we've got firm understanding around that earlier behaviour. And that's why the early intervention is critical. So we now say, classic examples now, you try not to be one-on-one with a child. So if someone is being one-on-one with a child, are they sex offending? We don't know. What we know is they're being one-on-one, and that's not okay. That's high-risk behaviour. It confuses the child's boundaries, and you're exposing yourself to a complaint, and we'll come and investigate that.
And is that information you're giving to those in the diocese in your training programs?
Yes.
And is it getting through?
I think it's starting to. Often when we put it that way with them, you can see a little bit, they sit back, they get a bit less defensive.
Can you suggest what more can be done to ensure that those, at least within your diocese, have a clearer understanding of what behaviour should be considered at risk and therefore be the subject of some report or another? Is it a question of more training or something else?
Well, it's the training development, and I think it's that cradle to grave, as David Leary used the term yesterday. In employment, we talk about employment cycle. So it's from the very beginning when someone is coming in throughout their work, and then if they're exiting, how that's managed. Same with volunteers engaging. How do we select volunteers in our programs? Like, we're going to roll out safeguarding officers in parishes. How do we select, make sure we've got the right people, keep them adequately developed and formed as they move ahead in their role?
Who do you talk to in the diocese about these issues that you have?
Which issues?
All the issues you've been describing for the last 15 minutes.
Was I talking too long?
No, not at all. I was trying to describe the issues I was referring to. Who do you talk to in the diocese about the challenges that you've been describing?
Oh, okay. We talk with our office, with my office.
Within your office?
Within
what about
office,
outside of your
yeah.
office?
Other leaders in the diocese. We'll talk, like, say, the Executive Director of Catholic Care. I've had these conversations with them. Certainly priests. I'm quite open at the training. I'll say this is what concerns me. So we would, with most leadership, this discussion I would have, certainly with the Vicar Generals, the Bishop, our independent advisories would be, panels would be aware that these are concerns that we hold.
And have movements been evident to you in relation to the challenges to improve the situation?
I really liked one of the Commissioner's questions earlier today about how do you measure success in this work? And I can say that's a project we have on foot to actually look at ways we can measure it better as well. So obviously we don't rely on number of complaints and so forth. So that's... So I would say generally I see positive movement happening, but we're not there yet, and we don't know if what we've got is right yet, and that's what we're trying to. That's why we really are keen, and we do as much as we can collaborate with others outside as well, and say tell us what we need to do differently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I turn to you, Ms. Larkman? Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
My name's Karen Rosemary Larkman.
And what's your position, Ms. Larkman?
I'm the Director for Safeguarding and Ministerial Integrity with the Archdiocese of Sydney.
And how long have you been in that position?
I've been in this position for nearly 14 months now.
And prior to that, you worked with Catholic Care in Sydney?
I was the General Manager at Catholic Care.
Thank you. Does your position have a complaint handling role?
Yes, it does.
So you perform the duties that Mr Eustons has spoken about, as well as broader safeguarding
That's right.
duties.
So my responsibility is to set the strategic direction for the Safeguarding Office. We've developed a 4-year strategic plan that's currently in draft and sitting with the Archbishop for sign-off. I respond to complaints and allegations, and although Sydney Catholic Schools and Catholic Care have day-to-day responsibility for complaints and allegations, the Archdiocese provides an oversight role. So I meet with Sydney Catholic Schools every month to go through their reportable conduct matters and any serious complaints that they want to discuss with me. And I also meet with Catholic Care to go through their reportable conduct matters. My role also involves instigating preventative measures in terms of the Archdiocese and parishes and a compliance element.
You say that one of the areas that there is an engagement with children in the Archdiocese in relation to parishes, particularly camps and excursions for altar services and volunteers.
That's right.
Now, I'm sure you know from the work of the Royal Commission that camps and the like, particularly with altar service, have come up in terms of past behaviour. What do you do to ensure the safety of children on those camps?
So there are a number of things we do. We ensure that there are comprehensive risk assessments in place that look at who's actually running the camp, whether the employees and volunteers have got appropriate checks and balances in place. So have they been through an appropriate recruitment, selection and induction process? Have they got current verified working with children checks? We also look at where the camp will take place. So they usually go to the Benedict XVI retreat centre. We look at, in the risk assessment, they look at ratios of children to adults, and they look at many other things in the risk assessment, you know, including what would happen if a certain incident takes place, what are the mitigation strategies that are going to be put in place.
Do they happen very often, the overnight excursions?
I think it's once a year.
Thank you. Now, you say that your parish priests also receive training.
Yes.
Is that mandatory?
They do, so they receive mandatory training. So I set up the office a year ago now and instigated a whole suite of training courses. All priests and clergy have to attend. So last year we delivered level 1 safeguarding training. So it was a basic training, mandatory for all priests and clergy. So we've got just under 300 incardinated priests in the Archdiocese of Sydney. So it was mandatory for those priests to attend, and it was a basic level training that looked at signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse, child abuse in general as well. It gave them a thorough induction into the Archdiocese policies and protocols to make sure that they understood what it actually said and what it meant. We talked to them about grooming. We used that Monica Applewhite information regarding grooming. Our training courses that we implemented in 2016 were based on the Ireland training. So when I initially set up the office, I looked around Australia at many of the dioceses in Australia. I looked at America, the UK and Ireland. And I was really impressed with the work that Teresa Devlin was doing in Ireland, and I made contact with her. And she very generously sent me through all of her training packages. And I developed Sydney training packages based on the Ireland model. She also sent me through many of her guidelines and forms. So a lot of the developmental work that I've done this year has been based on the Ireland model. I also got in touch with the NSPCC, National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and they have amazing resources there. So we've implemented many of the resources into our training material from the NSPCC. So we've collected information from many places. So our priests do annual mandatory training. So 2016 was level 1. Another major element of that training was recruitment, selection and screening of employees and volunteers, because I tell people a soft entry point into an organisation is via volunteers, and people often feel that they don't need to carry out as rigorous checks on volunteers. If we're not careful, the parish priest will tap somebody on the shoulder and say, you can just do this or you can do that. So we've really explained to them the importance of rigorous selection, recruitment and screening for volunteers and employees. It should be the same process they're going through.
What challenges remain for you now in making children safe and having the Archdiocese respond appropriately if there is an allegation?
So we're at the beginning of our journey. We're just a year in as the Safeguarding Office, and it was a new setup for Sydney. So I feel we're at the beginning of our journey. We've achieved amazing things in a year, but we've got an awful lot more to do.
What particular challenges have you identified?
For me, one of the challenges is information sharing. So when we're aware that we have issues with priests or clergy, it's very difficult to get information from. So I'll give you an example. Currently, there is somebody's made an allegation to the police about a member of clergy. So we've stood that member of clergy down, and I'm trying to get information from the police regarding the allegation, but it's proving to be very difficult to get them to release the information for me. So then it's hard for me to move forward with that matter.
Is there an ongoing police investigation?
No, they've decided that they will not investigate the matter. So I would just like the information, the allegation that was made and the statement. So they interviewed the priest. I'd like the statement regarding that interview to be able to provide a risk assessment to look at where we go from here and for our own internal investigation. So that's a challenge for me. Information sharing in general across church authorities and across orders and church.
Thank you. Can I turn to you, Ms. Musalin? Have I pronounced that correctly?
Musalin.
Thank you. Can you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Yes, my name is Andrea Joy Musalin.
And your position, Ms. Musalin?
My position at the moment is the project coordinator, the Safeguarding Project Coordinator for the Perth Catholic Archdiocese.
Now, I understand from the information you provided, you described yourself as the Director of the Safeguarding Program.
So within the organisation, I'm regarded as a director, so I oversee the Safeguarding Office. However, project coordinator is also another title that I'm more readily acknowledged by because my role in developing safeguarding is very hands-on.
You have parish-based safeguarding officers, I think, don't you?
Correct. We have over 200 parish-based safeguarding officers in our parishes.
Are they responsible for the hands-on dealing with complaint survivors and the like?
That's correct, in the first instance.
And you are the overseeing body in the program or project?
Correct.
The people who are doing the safeguarding work at the parish level are volunteers?
Yes, they are. However, many of them come with high levels of experience and expertise in a range of areas, but notably law enforcement, legal, child protection, education, psychology.
Who do they report to?
So they report directly to me.
They don't report through the parish priest?
No, directly to me.
A job description, I think, that was provided to us says that position reports to the parish priest and to the Safeguarding Project Coordinator.
Yes, but I am the main. They may report to the parish priest, but that is, I am the first port of call.
Could you see problems with them solely reporting to the parish priest?
Absolutely, and that's why they don't. That's why and in their training, they are required to sit a full 2-day training workshop before commencing in that role, and ongoing mandatory training is required. And I'm very strong and steadfast on the fact that they report directly to me in the first instance. The whole safeguarding program has been set up to alleviate the clergy's role in matters of safeguarding children and vulnerable in our parishes.
Then how does it be that on the job description that we've been provided that it still says report to the parish priest?
I can't really say on that because their training tells them otherwise, and it's commonly known otherwise. They may have to inform the parish priest of certain matters, and in the training that is made very clear that the parish priest isn't informed of all matters, only where and if necessary the parish priest needs to be advised. And a example of that would be if there was an offender in the parish. So if an offender had offended against a child and that offender was attending Mass or was part of church personnel, paid or unpaid.
Now, you say that you work in partnership with the WA Professional Standards Office.
I do.
So that's the separate body that is
Yes.
involved with complaint handling.
They are very separate to me, although we do work in partnership in relation to training. So we have sort of created a comprehensive training program, and they are responsible in the best part for the integrity and ministry side of the training and codes of behaviour and conduct side of things, whereas I'm more about the safeguarding and child protection training.
You describe your role as Safeguarding Project Coordinator, which
Yes.
I suppose is just a different title for the same job that you're holding. Is that right?
Correct. We're actually moving into changing that now after the set-up phase, and I will be titled Director.
Thank you. Is to effect change within the Perth Catholic Archdiocese.
Could you repeat that, please, Council?
Certainly, your description in the document you provided is to effect change within the Perth Catholic Archdiocese in relation to child protection and safety.
Correct.
How are you going to do that?
Well, that's a very big job, I must say. And when asked on that, I say, well, I've started. And that's exactly what I've done. I've started that role. I have been quite steadfast in saying and correcting people when they say that we have to acknowledge all the work that the Royal Commission is doing. We have to acknowledge child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, and I always have maintained that acknowledging it is not enough. We have to understand it, and we have to understand all aspects of child protection. We have to particularly understand how trauma affects the child's developing brain and how trauma affects more than the actual victim themselves. We have to understand how sex offenders work, or how paedophilia, which are two separate things in some instances, or how sex offenders and paedophiles, haebophiles and pederasts actually operate. What is their method of operandi? Coming from a policing background, I have applied a crime prevention philosophy to a lot of the work that we do, which means it's about prevention, it's about detection, but in best part it's about reducing opportunities for offences to happen and to also increase opportunities for children and families to actually make those reports.
You speak a bit about understanding various matters. Who is it within your archdiocese that needs to have the requisite understanding?
Well, I think the clergy need to have rigorous understanding. It's been my experience that their knowledge on this subject is not as good as it should be. So therefore we made that a priority. So clergy was a priority first. But I think
a priority, do you mean in terms of training?
Yes. So that's we set out, and we work from, the leadership have to model this. We all have to do it. We all have to understand it. We all have to be trained, but the leadership have to model it. So that was very important. But when we talk about who needs this training, everybody needs this training. And coming from a child protection background, one thing that has become quite obvious to me is that we haven't provided children with enough education and knowledge on this subject. So when I say this subject, I mean child protection generally speaking. But then I'm going to take that one step further and talk about the sex education of small children. We don't provide that. So in a crime prevention philosophy, and in well before the 10 elements that the Royal Commission handed down when I first started in this role, I began the framework with the 12 standards as put out by Childwise. I had been trained in those standards many years before, and in the previous work that I have done, I've used those, and I found them to be very effective and holistic, I suppose is a good word. So I see that those standards and the 10 elements that the Royal Commission are bringing in, they are the way in which we reduce opportunity for offences to occur or to be committed, and to also ensure that offences are detected when they happen. The problem with that is that they're the barriers that we put in place. They're the hoops that we try and make sex offenders jump through to make it harder. what I know of sex offenders and what I know of paedophilia, haemophilia and pederasty is that they are cultivated and they are deliberate and they will jump through those hoops. And if and when they do jump through those hoops that we've put in place, the last stop is the child. But for many, many years, and this is not exclusive to the church, my experience spans well beyond the church. For hundreds of years, we have missed that point. We haven't been educating children. There hasn't been appropriate protective behaviours or prevention education provided to children. We're just jumping on that now. Those wheels are just starting to turn now. And in relation to sex education, you know, the evidence shows and the data from the civil authorities in all states of Australia show that the most vulnerable of ages of child sexual abuse occurring are between, depending on the research that you're looking at, between 5 and 9 years of age. Well, most children don't get any knowledge on this subject until they're 12 years of age.
In terms of your role, how long did you say you'd been in it?
In my role?
Yes.
So I started on the 1st of November 2014. I started in a part-time capacity. I was, at the time, working with WA Police and also in a smaller role with Protective Behaviours WA Incorporated. And I had taken leave without pay from WA Police. And I could only, it was a full-time role, but I could only afford to commence in that role 2 days a week. But however, for the last just over a year, I've been in that role full-time.
What do you think your greatest achievement is in the relatively short time you've been in the role?
I think my greatest achievement is to instigate over 200 safeguarding officers fully trained in the parishes, because the role that they play is a vital role. We've worked on a capacity building model. We've strengthened local parishes. Obviously, I can't be everywhere at all times, and I need to be able to deploy resources at the local level, and I think that's key to ensuring the safety of children. We have again, coming from a crime prevention philosophy, if crime increases anywhere, in particular suburbs, the first thing the Commissioner for Police will do will increase visibility. And by increasing the visible and the visibility, you know, that's how we prevent crime or detect crime. Well, we'll apply that same analogy in that we have to be visible. And one of the things I'm most proud of, even though I've come across some, you know, I've come across some difficulty in implementing it in some instances, is the visibility of safeguarding officers, the promotion of safeguarding officers, keeping this alive in our church. It's not we do it, it's done. It's about keeping it alive. And one example of that would be that our safeguarding officers wear vests in church, bright vests that are, you know, bright for children to see. And I've sat in many parishes, and I've actually literally seen children tug on their parents' collar or their arm and ask, what does that lady do, or what does that man do? It gives us a good opportunity to explain to children what these people are there for. And regular briefings are provided at Mass. Children aren't going to see a name badge. It needs to be more visible. We have porch posters in the foyers of all our parishes as a deterrent for anyone thinking that the Catholic Church is a soft option or there's going to be opportunity in the Catholic Church. Well, I'd like to think that that's not the case anymore. I'd like to think that we are onto it better than we've ever been, and not that we like to deflect them somewhere else, because all children are important as each other, but in our church, you know, we're sending a very clear message that...
You said that you've had some difficulties in doing what you want to do. What are those difficulties?
For example, with the vests, some of the clergy at the local parishes have said, well, this is a church and that's not the place for a vest. But what I have found, Council, is that it's in the conversation, that you have with them, you explain why they're wearing it, what we're trying to achieve by that. And if you have the opportunity to have that conversation, most of them come around and can see your point of view. And I found that with most of the work that I do, is that it's in the conversation.
Thank you. Can I turn to you, Mr. Tynan? Your full name?
Sean Patrick Tynan.
And your position, Mr. Tynan?
Manager of Zimmerman Services.
What's Zimmerman Services?
Zimmerman Services is a whole-of-diocese child protection specialist entity that oversees the full gamut of child protection. We divide that into three: preventative or prevention, response, primarily investigative, and of course our healing services.
And the Royal Commission's heard a bit about your healing services in another case study, so leaving that to one side, in terms of the preventative and response, what work do you do there?
In terms of prevention, we undertake training on a number of different levels. So there is mandatory, a full-day mandatory child protection training course for everybody employed or engaged in child-related work, and that's also, of course, expected of all our leadership. There's also a range of multiple specialist or tailored training courses that we provide on an ad hoc basis, dependent on the needs of a particular program, school, what have you, parish. We also provide particular components of a course for parish leaders and for parish volunteers called Integrity in the Service of the Church. Separate from that, we also provide ongoing professional advice through our intake service. So any member of the diocese is able to contact Zimmerman Services with a concern for a child. A lot of those contacts don't constitute a report of child abuse. However, they are concerns around the child, and that gives us an opportunity to engage with the individual, provide them professional advice and support them in carrying out that advice. Separate again, we also verify the working with children checks for volunteers. So we verify all the volunteers across the schools, Catholic care parishes. That way we have a centralised database of all our volunteers, and it was mentioned earlier that that's a potential area for risk, and I would concur with that. Volunteers are an ongoing source of strength for our church, but it's also a potential area of weakness. We've recently, in fact, as a diocese, established a coordinator of volunteers, somebody to help drive and support the parish processes in engaging with volunteers and ensuring that they've got a good induction process. And we've got a handbook out to that effect, which is available online. We also undertake audits for the schools in particular. So as part of their accreditation process as independent systemic schools, we have a cycle, it's now 6 yearly, where we come in and we undertake a fairly rigorous audit of a particular school to ensure that they meet the standards around ensuring the protection of children. In 2016 we conducted 10 of those. And of course there's the ongoing role of giving information and advice to people at gatherings and other such things. We've also logged and checked the testimonials of we've checked and logged 90 testimonials for visiting clergy and religious. That was in 2016. And obviously there's the ongoing role for me of giving advice to senior management, senior leadership, particularly the bishop.
Do you publish any statistics of your work?
We haven't yet, but we are looking to publish a fairly comprehensive range of data around our both historic realities. The diocese, I think, has been very open and forward in stating that we have got a terrible past in failing to protect children, in failing to stop predatory individuals in particular, but also to give current statistics. So the rates of reporting or intake, as we would call it, the numbers of investigations finalised, etc., so that people can have a very clear understanding of what we're doing now.
You said that you were looking to do that. What's stopping the diocese from doing it?
There's nothing stopping the diocese from doing it, but we're planning to have that as part of our annual reporting mechanism for a relatively new council that we've established. So our hope is that the first annual report of that council will be published in December of this year,
And
looking back at the last financial year.
Has the decision been made to include the data of the sort you've mentioned?
In terms of the historic matters, I think that's still an issue we are finalising. In terms of the current data, my understanding is that we're moving forward with that.
So that means a decision has been made to publish it.
Yes, and may I say, we also have what's called a year in review for the whole of diocese. And the last one for 2016, we've actually published some data for Zimmerman Services, not of historic nature, but of our current rates of contacts and investigations and so forth.
Do you name priests against whom allegations have been substantiated?
We have not done so to date, and I've certainly looked very closely at a number of models, particularly Boston, around that issue. The question arises, for those who have been found guilty, obviously, in a criminal court, it's not an issue. They're publicised. For those who have sustained findings in an administrative process, there are pros and cons to it. Obviously, because they fill a public position as a priest, and if they were to remain in ministry, then I think the argument would very strongly favour that. But given that, for the most part, they're removed from ministry, certainly in my experience, then I'm not so sanguine about the argument. But it's certainly an ongoing discussion we have.
You, I think, share the view of another panel member that the New South Wales Ombudsman's reportable conduct scheme is a positive initiative?
Absolutely. Zimmerman Services, in fact, was established as a consequence of the New South Wales Ombudsman. There was a report undertaken in, I think it was 2004, and it was looking into the efficacy and efficiency of the then arrangements under 3A, where CCR had management of child protection.
CCR being the Catholic Church.
Catholic Commission for Employment Relations.
Thank you.
And there was a particular matter that involved the Diocese of Maitland-Newcastle. Now, those findings were quite adverse, and as a consequence of which the then Bishop Michael Malone wanted to have an entity available to him that had specialist child protection knowledge and skills. Equally, there was a change to the Ombudsman regulations that made each bishop the head of agency under 3A. That's my understanding.
Has that been delegated, that role?
In Maitland-Newcastle, it's been delegated to myself as manager of Zimmerman Services.
Would you like to see Part 3A extended in any way?
Absolutely. The New South Wales bishops, through Maitland-Newcastle's current bishop, Bishop Bill Wright, penned a letter to the Attorney General's office. I believe it was late 2015. Seeking that that Part 3A, the mandate for Part 3A, be extended to parallel with the Child Protection Working with Children Act mandate. So, in other words, that any individual in New South Wales who is deemed to be in child-related work fall under Part 3A. Now, this is important for us in particular because the only reason that Catholic clergy fall under 3A is because of their relationships with schools, particularly primary schools. There is a canon that talks to the role of the cleric in the Catholic education of children. But my understanding is if you remove a primary school from a parish, then they actually fall outside 3A. And my understanding, and I stand to be corrected, but that is the case for most Anglican clergy. They actually fall outside 3A. So from our perspective, it's quite important that happen. I'm hoping that the New South Wales government will look favourably on that submission.
So why would clergy who don't have a school within their parish be considered to be engaged in child-related work for the purposes of the Working with Children legislation?
Because part of the normative provision of ministry involves children. That's our argument, and the OCG, I think, is of that same mind. And also, in the regulation, they specifically note that any minister, rabbi, mufti, priest, any leader of a religious service falls within the scope of the Working with Children check.
By mere fact of being a member of the clergy.
Correct.
Have you had a response?
From whom, sorry?
The Attorney General.
There was an acknowledgement of the letter, my understanding is, but nothing since then.
What other suggestions do you have for reform, Mr Tynan?
That's a big one. Perhaps I could approach it in terms of what I see are some of the key challenges that face us. The use of Chapter 16A is an important consideration. Again, whilst it's under the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act, and it's clearly designed to enhance our ability to share information to protect children, I think in practice there are potentially some limitations to that it would be helpful that perhaps they clarify or strengthen that provision.
In what way?
So the provision of information between entities that aren't strictly providing the range of services to children that are mentioned in 16A, that may hold relevant information.
For example, which agencies are you thinking of?
For example, the Professional Standards Office, if you want to look at it technically, probably doesn't fall within 16A. We exchange information with them in relation to clergy, but there's obviously some limitations there and uncertainties. So wherever you have a system where people feel uncertain that they're able to do something, there is a human tendency to be cautious and not to do it. And we know very clearly that the exchange of information is absolutely vital to protecting children.
So
you have to know the background of people to understand and put in context the current behaviour.
You're covered by the exchange of information legislation. And what is it you do that makes you covered?
My argument is that because we work on behalf of the Schools Office and the Systemic Schools and Catholic Care, that we're covered under the welfare and education provisions.
Any other suggestions you'd like to make, Mr Tynan?
Yes. We're currently looking at having one of my team accredited as a trainer for protective behaviours. So we want to promote and develop that within our schools, and it's been an extraordinarily difficult process. And I've found out, or at least my understanding is, that Protective Behaviours New South Wales is no longer funded to train the trainer, and I find that an extraordinary circumstance. Protective behaviours is not the answer for everything or everybody, to be sure, but it is a well-tested and research-based program that, for want of a better term, hardens the target. It makes children aware, and it empowers them to protect themselves, and for the right sort of children. So obviously, protective behaviours is not something you would roll out necessarily in for example, an out-of-home care service where children who have been traumatised and are victims of abuse in statutory out-of-home care. You would have to look very carefully at using it in those circumstances, but certainly for children in schools, where all things considered are that they come from, relatively stable homes, that is an area where you can really use it to enhance safety.
When you say it's no longer funded, that's by the state government?
That's my understanding. I, again, stand to be corrected, but that's my understanding.
The course is available, presumably, by a range of people who offer it, but a person seeking it would need to fund that themselves.
That's correct. And we're doing that. And it's only thanks to the dedicated work of the PB volunteers that we're able to do that.
Who are the PB volunteers?
The training board or the management board of protective behaviours. I don't know their names. I can obviously get them for you. But my understanding is they're very senior people, a number of university lecturers, etc. But they're doing that work in protective behaviours on a voluntary basis. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Are there any other final matters that you wish to raise, Mr Tynan?
No, there isn't. Thank you.
The one issue I wish to address to the panel as a whole was in relation to Towards Healing. I think each of you more or less operate under the umbrella of Towards Healing, is that right?
Towards Healing, the Diocese of Bateman and Newcastle, and I can only speak for the diocese, of course, is a signatory of Towards Healing, and it is obviously for those who choose to go to Towards Healing that we will support that and facilitate it. Our experience, though, since 2010 has been that people don't choose to go to Towards Healing. Now, in terms of the elements of Towards Healing... Sorry?
What do they do instead?
What they do instead is choose to use our voluntary protocol for managing claims. So, Your Honour, we have a very differentiated system where if a person comes forward and says that they've been a victim of abuse, we take that at face value and they receive ongoing supports through Healing and Support, and you're aware of that. If they choose to make a claim for financial compensation for damages at some point, they're most welcome to do that, and it's their choice how they do that. Our experience is that their choice is to work directly with the diocese and obtain a settlement that way. They don't choose to go Towards Healing.
Is there any reason you've got to identify as to why that's the preferred course?
I think the public standing of Towards Healing has been significantly, if not permanently, damaged. Obviously, the case study conducted by this Royal Commission exposed a circumstance that if I were coming forward to seek compensation, I wouldn't have a bar of, if I can say that. Yeah.
You just did.
Your Honour, can I add to that discussion a little? Having to be the person who administers the Towards Healing process, and be quite frankly, I'm not a great defender of it either. I think there's some inherent tensions within it. I think it's been marketed as a pastoral process, but the reality is it's a complaints management process like any other, has all those hallmarks, and it can be quite rigorous, and it can be, if you apply it fully, which is what we try to do, it can be very challenging for people, both survivors and church authorities alike. And they find difficulty with that. And so it is a complaints management process like any other, with all those challenges. But the reality is it has pastoral level outcomes only. I think that's a better way of describing what it is. Yet it's been marketed, I think, for 2 decades as a pastoral process. And I think over time may have been the resourcing of it and implementation of it may not have been what it should have been. And I think it's probably fair to say that there is a requirement under Towards Healing that when the church authorities receive a complaint, and there's discussion of what that looks like, but I would suggest it's information that someone's been abused by church personnel, that is referred immediately to the Professional Standards Office in the state as the independent body, who then should respond to the survivor to outline all their options for them. And if they don't want to go through Towards Healing, well then there's no reason why they shouldn't then be referred back to the diocese or some other course of action. But they don't do that. Church authorities, I think, for many years have not done that.
Ms Parola?
Yes, we're more Diocese of Parramatta. The process is more aligned with the Maitland Diocese, Zimmerman House. We consulted with them and looked. That was one of the models we looked at when the current process was set up in 2014. The reason, and it's not exactly the same. There are still some differences. But part of the reason was what we were hearing from survivors is it wasn't working. The Towards Healing process, generally speaking, some definitely had good experiences with it, but generally we didn't have it right.
Can you identify why they were saying that?
My understanding of the observations that we had in that is that the Towards Healing process is more focused, as Mark referred to, in terms of a complaint management process. And what we've tried to do with the process we have is just to our first response is a compassionate response to the person who's come forward. And the secondary part is, now what do you want to do with that when you know what you want to do? So our first response is to say to them, thank you for coming. We give them a companion, a suitably qualified person who can journey with them on wherever that takes them. That has no end to it. That can go on for years. No matter what they do, that person is always there. And then that person walks with them to help them and talk to them about what is it you need. There's an immediate response. If they come forward and on that day they need to see a psychologist, they need to get to a doctor, that companion will help them do that in the immediate, and we pay for that. Regardless, we don't look at the complaint yet. When they're ready, when they've worked with them to look at what is it that you're seeking, what is it you need for some sort of healing or growth or to move forward, then that person will help. And if they say, I want to come to the diocese, I talked about options. So they might say, I want the bishop to know what happened. I want an apology from that order. I need some money to help me do the course I never got to finish, whatever it is. The companion helps them develop what they call a record of experience about their story, and that comes to our independent reparations panel. Now, in the early discussion with them, they also know that if they prefer not to use that process, they may want to go to the Professional Standards Office and go through the Towards Healing process in that regard. So I think what we've tried to do is make it more focused on the person who comes forward, and then dealing with the complaint. What's the actual complaint as a secondary thing, and it's ongoing. And in terms of counselling and companionship, that has no end to it.
Can I add two things there? I think the provision for the church authorities to refer these sorts of complaints to the state office really was intended to avoid any obvious, in my view, obvious conflicts of interest that the diocese has in dealing with complaints of this nature against their own people. And the state officers are meant to be independent and not agents of the church authorities, in my view, and that's the way we conduct ourselves. There's also the other element, which is then dealing with the accused person and assessing and investigating the matter properly and fully. And we use all independent professional practitioners on a fee-for-service basis to do that for us, and they're very astute and they're very good at the way they deal with people too. And they will make findings on the balance of probabilities, and that is always useful in my experience so far to the church authorities in dealing with the accused person. Always very useful. I don't think we need to lose sight of that too. We need to. That's the other half of Towards Healing, is dealing with that person and their behaviours.
Ms. Larkman, was there anything you wish to add?
I think quite similarly. I've only been there a year. The matters that have come in over that year, I refer to the Professional Standards Office, and I can see prior to my time, person in position, the Chancellor, who managed many of the safeguarding matters, worked very closely with the New South Wales Professional Standards Office.
But it's not something that you have had direct involvement with?
So matters that have come in, I've referred to the Professional Standards Office.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Ms.
Could I just
before you do, perhaps if I could ask Ms. Muslin, if you have anything you wish to say.
I do have one thing I'd like to say. I think this might be the forum to be heard. One of the roles that I oversee is where we have a known child sex offender in a parish, so someone who's been previously convicted of sex offences has gone to prison and come out of prison and is now attending Mass. We have a responsibility to manage that risk in a church, but quite often we have very little knowledge around that. So we might, for an example, the choir master, for want of a better word, has gone to prison because he's sexually offended against children in the parish. He's come out of prison, he's come back to church, someone's recognised him and has told the parish priest, or has come straight to my safeguarding officer. The safeguarding officer has brought that directly to me. Sometimes that's the only information we get. We know that he's a child sex offender or she's a child sex offender, but no other information is coming forward, yet we're expected to manage these people. And
Forward from who? The police?
No, we get nothing from the police.
But when you say there is nothing coming forward, who do you say it should come forward from?
Well, what I would like to see is a little where we do manage these people in our parishes. If we could be privy to a little bit more information around their offending and around the risk that they pose.
From whom?
From the police.
Thank you.
Because they're the holder of that information. So we're expected to manage these people and keep our congregation safe, but with very limited knowledge on the person. The more knowledge we can have, and I understand that there's some things we cannot be told, and there is some information police cannot share. But surely when they are a reportable sex offender, which in my experience most of them are a reportable sex offender, so they're reporting to the Angkor unit, and you know, something as simple as why can't the police ask the offender, even if they can't mandate it yet because the legislation doesn't allow it to, in a voluntary capacity, ask them if they're going to a church. Are you going to a church? If so, which church are you going to? Okay, then they could provide us that information, because council, we can only manage, and we only manage the ones we know about. My bigger concern are the ones we don't know about that are in our parishes. That's one of my biggest concerns, particularly when it's my job to keep children safe.
Thank you. Mr Tynan, you wish to say something about Towards Healing?
Partially about Towards Healing. It's the issue of independence or not. And I'm probably going to be swimming against the tide, arguing that, in fact, agencies such as Zimmerman Services is not well served being or appearing to be independent of the entity they're working in. And the reason I say that is, if, as in the Irish model and in all the models of the representatives here, we're paid for by the church, then we're an entity of the church. You've got to follow the money. And my experience is that we are able to achieve a level of cultural change from working internally and being a recognised and acknowledged part of the diocese that I doubt we would be able to achieve if we were external to the diocese. So, for example, if from an investigation that we conduct, we identify some systemic weaknesses in a particular school, we can go directly to the leadership of that school and discuss those findings and establish a plan to address them. And that's a normative part of our process. The use of intelligence from individual investigations is a key component to improve practice. I'm not saying that we do it perfectly. Indeed, I think I had a conversation with my staff a few weeks ago that I want to improve that particular area of our practice.
Can I just interrupt you to ask you why you couldn't do that if you were not dependent on the church?
If we weren't dependent on the church, if we were funded by some other entity, would be FACS, the Family and Community Services.
But that wouldn't stop
and they
you.
don't, sorry, my point is they don't do that because it's outside their legislative mandate. We do it because our responsibility is primarily to the people of the diocese, and if we see something that that brings concern forward around lack of protectiveness, not that anything's occurred, but it's that lack of protectiveness, then we're empowered to do something about it. And the other element is around relations. You have to establish relationships where you can have those direct conversations and tell people, look, I know you're really proud of your program or your school, but guess what? There are some things that aren't actually okay, and let's talk about how we fix them.
You referred to looking at your investigations as a whole and coming to a view about them. You don't need to be dependent upon the church to do that work, do you?
No.
Thank you. Your Honour, I've got nothing further.
Mr Gray?
Just one matter, Your Honour. Ms Lackman, I'll ask you, and then if anybody else wants to comment, they'd be welcome to do so. Two agencies that are obviously very important in this whole area, certainly in New South Wales in particular, are the Ombudsman and the police. Could you tell the Royal Commission briefly something of the nature and extent of your office's interactions with the Ombudsman and the police? Are they working well? Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, well, when setting up the Safeguarding Office, one of the two main initial contacts I made was with the New South Wales Police Sex Crime Squad, and established a link there, and it's been really useful for advice and support on many of the ongoing matters that I deal with in terms of safeguarding for priests and clergy. And the other important link I have is with the Ombudsman. So I meet regularly with Calvin Simon from the Ombudsman's office to talk through not only reportable conduct matters that we have currently in hand, but also best practice, potential matters that are coming to my attention, and seek advice from them. So they're two really good resources that I use.
And just focusing on New South Wales for the moment, Ms Carola, would you have anything to say about those two aspects?
I think it's essential. A strong relationship.
Do you have them?
Yes. The Catholic Schools Office has met. All the New South Wales Catholic Schools Office have been meeting with the New South Wales Ombudsman quarterly for half a day, and then they meet as practitioners in the afternoon for 16 years. And that flows elsewhere. We have a strong relationship with the Ombudsman's office. We often ring them to seek advice. We ask them to look at our systems. Police, Sex Crime Squad, I think most of us would have contacts with there, and our local area commands as well in Parramatta. The other ones that I add to that is the New South Wales Children's Guardian. We've certainly in the last 2-3 years have developed a much closer relationship with the Guardian, where we can ring and seek advice and so forth as well. I think it's absolutely essential.
Thank you. And I'll just move next to Mr Tynan, being another New South Wales participant. Without going over the ground you've already covered, are there any other remarks you would make about those two agencies?
I think I've canvassed the Ombudsman. In terms of the police, one of the ways we have to measure whether in fact what we're doing works is to try and see ourselves through the eyes of an external statutory authority. At the moment, and for a number of years now, the police locally, and two strike forces in particular, have been referring victims of abuse to our healing and support program to be supported through the criminal process. Now, these are hard-boiled coppers. They're not going to put their witnesses at any risk. So it's from that sort of conduct I know that we are conducting ourselves appropriately and in fact starting to build up some sense of trust and respect, hopefully, amongst police. So our ability to exchange information with police is very good. Bishop Malone established what was called an open files policy. It's really a protocol more. And Bishop Wright has supported and continued that. So we actively provide information to police if they're conducting investigations into the diocese around child protection issues. I think the ability to obtain information around people registered on the sex offenders on the register is an important consideration. We've had one particular matter which has already been canvassed in case study 43, and we had a very good experience in being able to work with probation and parole there. But the question of what we don't know in our parishes is one that haunts, I think, all of us. Are there offenders out there who we don't know about? And if we don't, we can't do anything about it. We became aware of one matter late last year, or around August actually, of an individual who was charged for historic sex crimes, who was in one of our parishes, and we established the undertakings from that individual. We briefed particular individuals who were identified as supports and guardians. It's a formal process. We do that. The parish priest is fully briefed and part of it. So we've got mechanisms. to do it, but if we don't know about it, then we can't. So that is certainly an area of concern.
Now, Ms Musselman, you touched upon a related topic in an answer you gave earlier, but is there, and I know the Ombudsman is not something that you have in Western Australia in the same way that...
No, we don't have the same setup as they do in New South Wales.
But about the police, apart from what you've already said, is there anything else you would add?
Not really. Just to say, just a little bit more on what I've already said about the police. It seems to go, we give them information, but we get nothing back, and I understand the reasons for that. I've been a police officer for 28 years, but I think that process could help. If we are setting ourselves up to protect children, and we want to be, as our Archbishop will say, we are the leading contributors to the abuse of children in institutions, and now we have to be the leaders in the solutions to the problem. Well, we need help doing that. We can't do it alone. To the point where I have sex offenders in my parishes, none of which are clergy or ex-clergy. They are laity or parishioners who come to church with GPS tracking devices or Supreme Court orders. So we're talking high risk. And when I asked parole why have they got a GPS tracking device, one of the responses I received earlier on in my role was because of the high risk of grooming behaviour. Well, we know about that one, but like I said, and as Sean said, what about the ones we don't know about? I think we could make that better, and I think we could be safer, especially given that when sex offenders, those who are convicted, and ideally most of them aren't, but those who are and they go to prison, and the great chaplaincy and the great work that's done in prisons by churches, ultimately we'll see churches of all denominations being the first stop for a child sex offender. So I think we do need a little bit more help than what we're getting as well in managing sex offenders.
Is one of your points, Ms Musselman, that a person who's left jail has a right to practice their faith, and you do not prevent them practicing their faith, and on those grounds you need to be provided what information you can. You do not have the option to exclude them from the church, do you?
That's correct, and that's a bit of a frustration as well. That and that's an argument one can have. Do I think church is the place for them, for those who are truly repentant? Yes, I do. Church is a hospital for the sick, and I think that if we do it right, keeping the safety of children and the vulnerable as the first priority, I think it can be done. But we need help I think we need help in that, and In
a different point, though. As I understand it, you have no right to exclude them from
Correct.
church.
Correct. And the church agreements or memo of understandings that many of us work from are not legally binding documents. They're exactly that, a memo of understanding that they voluntarily agree to, and they voluntarily agree to abide by the conditions therein.
And then finally, Mr Eustance, in terms of the police, apart from what you've already said, the nature and extent of your dealings in your position with the police in Queensland?
We have direct reporting protocols with Task Force Sino in Victoria, the New South Wales State Sex Crimes Group, and the Queensland Police Service Child Safety and Sex Crimes Group as well. And simply, it's a direct email or phone number. And we will send everything in writing. And we have a form that we notify them by. I do a lot of liaising with different police services on behalf of a range of church authorities in Queensland to get information from them. I have a very good connection with the people at the Queensland Police Service for obvious reasons, and I find them refreshingly open, to be quite frank with you. They'll share what they can. There are limitations, of course. And I've dealt with individuals on serious matters in those other organisations, and I find them helpful. They will provide you with information because they understand that you need to prevent a risk if you bear with them. I find that they do share the information to some extent. The other states, we don't have direct reporting. We don't have a lot of complaints from the other states. But if we did have information that related to that, we would then funnel that through the Queensland Police Service, who would then put that into their national database. That information would be available.
So in your experience, the dealings with the police are working broadly well?
Well, it could be easier, but we don't have major frustrations when we need it.
So those are my questions.
Nothing arising, Your Honour.
Again, can I thank all of you for your contribution today and formally excuse you. And we'll adjourn until when?
Monday morning, Your Honour, 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock on Monday. Adjourn.
All stand.